Hi, everybody. I'm very pleased to be back here. As Ann was going on, I mentioned to Jim that we're running a little behind schedule. And I said, Jim, I set myself up for 15 minutes here. Do you think I need to cut that short? And he said, 15 minutes is good. 10 to 15, that would be 7, 8, 10. So knowing that it's just me and lunch, I'm going to try to be as concise as I can. I do want to notice a couple of takeaways. I took a couple of notes that I just want to mention here. One of them is, first of all, a big thank you to Best NC for hosting this and foregrounding the principalship. I hope you take away one thing, actually several things today, but one of them is this. We in the field of education don't know of a more cost-effective lever to improve student learning, particularly in high-need schools, than putting the right principals in those schools. There just isn't anything that comes close. That's number one. Number two, we've seen a number of comments right away, beginning with Walter McDowell and then hearing from Steve Lassiter and Jeff Eisenhower and Eddie Price, that show us that really good principals can make a dramatic difference in student learning. We've known that for 35 years, that really good principals can make a profound difference in student learning. What we haven't figured out as a nation or any state is how to do this at scale. What does it take to produce those principals at scale? Because we know what it looks like in this school and that school and the other. I'm going to share with you today some of our efforts in Illinois and some of the progress that we've made at doing this. This is a recent study, just came out. The author of this study is coming out to Chicago shortly to talk with us about why Chicago is such an outlier in this distribution. This is Sean Reardon from Stanford. These are 3,000 American school districts. And the first thing they tell us is what we already know. And that is that the really high-performing districts are in the rich districts. Let me see if I've got a little pointer here, or if this thing will do it. Yeah. The really high-performing districts are the wealthier districts. Let's see, and that won't work on this. This doesn't take a pointer. If you go to the upper left on there, what you'll see is those are the highest income districts in the country. And these are the highest income districts that have a significant mix of African-American and Latino and white kids at every grade. So these are 3,000 districts. So the first thing you notice is high-income districts have much higher student achievement than low-income districts. We already knew that. But the other thing that's worth noticing is that any given point on that particular distribution, any given income point that you want to move across, there's a 3-grade level difference in how the higher performing schools perform and the lower performing schools. You follow? If you take any socioeconomic point on that, it doesn't determine the learning outcomes of kids. There's a 3-grade level spread between how poor districts, the weaker districts do, and the stronger districts do. So to make that point with Charlotte-Mecklenburg, to tie it into what we just heard, Charlotte-Mecklenburg, in the upper right, is 4 grades above national averages in terms of student performance. And yet this is a school district with a median income that is, I can't see the figure there, maybe you can, it's far below our contrasting district, which is Simi Valley in California. That's the school district where the Ronald Reagan Library is. We picked on it simply because we were trying to show that even at higher income levels, there are lower performing districts. And even at lower income levels, there are higher performing districts. So the view that poverty determines school outcomes turns out to be a gross oversimplification. Does it influence it? Absolutely. But some districts are able to deal with low income much more effectively than other districts are, and it has to do with leadership at the top and leadership in each school. In 1987, under Ronald Reagan, the Secretary of Ed, William Bennett, came to Chicago and pronounced Chicago's public schools the worst school system in America. And I was teaching at that time. I was teaching at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, and I remember that there was a big debate over whether Chicago was really the worst district in America, or maybe it was Detroit or Cleveland. That's not a discussion you want to be in. You know, are we the worst or third from the bottom, right? So at that time, we actually were third from the worst in the state of Illinois among all 55 of the largest districts in the state. I'll return to that in just a second. Look at what happened by 2015. One of the biggest critics of Chicago public schools is Crane's Chicago Business. Read that for yourself. Chicago started to be a national story at about that moment in elementary and in secondary school achievement. New York Times in 2017, there's no better place to see the difference that principals can make than Chicago. We've jacked up the college attendance and college completion rates. Younger children have made the biggest gains in the state in reading and math, larger than every other major city except Washington in the whole US. And in fact, if you look at the last 10 years, it's better than Washington, D.C. And this is the third largest school district in the state, 90% minority kids, 85% low-income kids. Huffington Post came out shortly thereafter. I'll tell you in a minute why they wrote it. See what they said. What you see there is the district and higher ed working together in the partnership ways that Ann Clark described. The reason the HuffPost wrote this is they wanted to show quite often when you see a poor performing school or a poor performing district improve dramatically, people will say, well, of course it improved. It had nowhere to go but up. It was so bad, of course its gains were better. The truth is most poor performing schools stay low performing. Most low performing districts stay low. It is not easy to move these things. And so what that article did was to compare Chicago to Detroit, and Chicago's even worse than it was at the beginning of Detroit's even worse than it was at the beginning of No Child Left Behind, and Chicago, of course, is far better. The principal really change student learning outcomes because the principal can't go in the class and teach. What you see on the far right is we're trying to improve student engagement and learning. This only happens at a significant level by changing quality of classroom instruction. You can move other chairs around the deck, but if you really want to improve the quality of student learning, particularly in lower income schools, the quality of classroom instruction has to improve. Al Shanker was right, you can't find high quality teachers, but what he overlooked was you can develop high quality teachers, and good principals don't just hire them, they develop them. And that takes you to that next box, which is organizational capacity. What does it mean for principals to develop the organizational capacity to do what Chuck said his company does, which is to get better every year? Well, that means, as he said, your staff has to be in a learning mode. Job number one for a great principal is teacher learning. If a great principal makes sure that those teachers are developing their instructional practice year after year, you cannot avoid student increases in their test scores and, more importantly, in their learning overall. But training principals to be able to develop teacher learning at scale that matters is not easy. It's time intensive. It can't be the old model of principal development that we used to have. My dad was a principal for most of his career, and as he likes to say, nobody ever expected me to improve student learning outcomes. Because the old model of the principal didn't do that. In the new model, we are holding principals accountable for that, and I would say, and we should. But that means we have to equip principals to actually rise to that challenge. That means they've got to understand how to build the organizational capacity of a school that will result in student engagement and learning. Administrative teams on the left. Here we heard from the private sector in the last session how important it is that teachers work in teams, that his staff work in teams. And so when he was asked, what would you do if you had 50 reports? The first thing that our principals do is they figure out what's the team structure going to be for this many teachers to work together to accomplish the fundamental goals of the school. What is school organizational capacity? There's actually a lot of good research done on this. The Consortium on Chicago School Research has been doing this longitudinal study for 25 years now. And what they've developed is the following. What they say is that, look, a school that gets even 3 of these 5 things right has a 10 times greater chance statistically than other schools to perform above socioeconomic status predictors. So let's focus on that for just a second. What this means is they studied those schools that have the same demographics of kids and found out some schools are here and some schools are here. So they spent over 20 years trying to study what's the difference in these schools. This study came out after 19 years. They're still studying it. Schools that have strong leadership, we've heard that over and over today, that develop the professional capacity of their staff, that have strong ties with parents and community, that are really holding students to a high academic standard and developing the teachers to do that, those schools get different results.